Right. There we go.
Perfect. So if you could just move on to the next slide. And the next one, sorry, that's just a bit of a... So why change, really? We've had a stroke service in Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire that works fairly well, but why change? And the reasons for change are the demand for stroke care is going to increase over the coming years. And alongside that increase in demand for stroke care, the specialist stroke workforce is quite limited. It's very specialised workforce, and there's just, like everywhere else in the NHS, there's just not enough people going into it. In fact, the vacancy rate for stroke consultants within our area has historically been quite high, and as it has also been for nursing recruitment. So in order to we need to attract more consultants, we need to attract more nurses, we need to attract more support workers. The other thing that we knew about Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire is that the provision and quality of the services that are delivered varies very much upon where you live at the moment. So if you live next door, say, to Southmead Hospital, you can come in any time of day and always get the same standard of care. But if you perhaps live closer to Western Hospital, there'll be certain hours of the day where you might not be able to get the care at that hospital, so you'll be brought somewhere else. And actually, we want to make it equal across the region so that every patient who requires stroke care gets the same treatment, irrespective of where they are, what time of day it is, and that kind of thing. That leads on to the outcomes for people in our area, depending very much on where you receive treatment as well. So patients have described, when this journey was started looking at whether we should change services, some patients described feeling like they were on a cliff edge after they'd left hospital, and it was just like being pushed off a cliff and they were forgotten about, and that should never happen. So, and there was also a lack of integration and communication between services alongside waits for rehab. We also, the consistency of the services has also evolved very independently of each other, and so each place that currently offers stroke services is...
Sorry.
I'll unmute myself. So the way in which services have evolved over the years means that the staff differently, the way the services are operated is very differently across the region. There is also a need to deliver value for money. So the people who pay the NHS commissioners, who are the people who give the provider hospitals money to deliver these services, they need to make sure that every pound we spend on behalf of taxpayers gives as much health benefit to the population as possible. So I think with all those things in mind, stroke services need to undergo a period of change to make them more equitable, more consistent, better value for money. So this project has been around for quite a long time. There was a pre-consultation business case that was approved back in May 2021. And what that did an awful lot of research into how stroke services were working, what was wrong with them. And it basically set out why we need to change everything. And that was approved, which then led on to a much more detailed piece of work, which was called the decision-making business case. And that went into more detail around how it would, not just the fact that we need to change things, but what would need to change and how we might start to change those. So that was approved in February last year. And then in spring of last year, a programme team was assembled for implementation. So there's myself and there's various other people who are delivering parts of the project in different areas across the region. And what we're trying to do is look at what was said in that decision-making business case and that was agreed by all of the stakeholders as being what should happen. We need to try and implement that into real life, which is in reality, it's often the hardest part of the project, because you move from being a very much a strategic document that you just need to sit and write to being something that you actually have to deliver operationally, and delivering anything is difficult within the sort of tight constraints that all of our clinicians have to work. So that's where we are now. If you could go on to the next slide, please, Rebecca. Oh, and the next one, sorry. So I've said to Rebecca, I'm going to try and not use acronyms, but there may be some in some of the diagrams that you might see. And it's the bane of everyone's life within the NHS generally. So we have various acronyms for different things. We obviously have the South West Ambulance Service Trust, and then within the stroke pathway we've got various different units, which are the hyperacute stroke unit, the acute and the subacute units. And we've also got a model of community care, which we call Integrated Community Stroke Service. But I will try and not use acronyms, but I just wanted to put that in for completeness, really. So if you want to move on. So this looks like quite a busy diagram, but what it's basically saying is how we work now. So if you are a stroke patient and someone rings 999, an ambulance will come and get you, and they will take you to your nearest hospital. So now that is either Southmead Hospital, the BRI, or Western General Hospital. And what they'll do is when the ambulance comes and gets you, they'll assess you, they might give you some medication, and they will ring through to the local emergency department to tell them that we think we've got a stroke patient on the way, could you be ready to receive them? So you'd then go into your local ED department, and then you'd be, if you need to be admitted, then you'll be admitted into a stroke ward within that hospital that you were in ED at. And then the treatment would continue within that stroke ward, and that treatment would range from when you're very, very sick to quite a long way into your rehabilitation. And then you'd get discharged either to go home or to go to social care with care packages, or to a community hospital, or the brain injury rehabilitation unit, where you'd get some more general rehab, and then you'd go home maybe with some support around social care. And I think all three hospitals have things like ED departments, stroke wards, rehab, support, and they operate the trans-ischemic attack clinics, the TIA clinics. And so your pathway is very much dependent on your location. So, you'll get brought in, but then depending on where you're brought will depend very much on where you end up and how long you spend in each setting. So that's how it works currently. So if you could just go on to the next slide. And for this slide, we're really just focusing on those blue boxes. So this is the new stroke pathway, which we will move to. So again, you will arrive in hospital. So if you arrive, say, by ambulance, the ambulance will respond to the 999 call and come to wherever you are. They'll still assess you in the same way, but rather than ringing through to an ED department, they'll ring through straight to a dedicated stroke team at Southmead Hospital, who will then be able to do a bit more of a thorough triage on exactly what treatment you'll need. So if they think you need some sort of operational procedure like a thrombectomy, they can start getting ready for that, rather than just being told there's a stroke, come in, get downstairs to ED. It'll be very much more, they'll go downstairs knowing much more fully what to expect in that patient, so they'll be much more prepared. So you'd then come into the emergency department at Southmead Hospital, where you'd be met by a stroke team who would be expecting you and would have a good idea of what it is that you will need immediately. If you have had a stroke and you then need to be admitted, you'll be admitted to the hyperacute stroke unit, which is the HASU one here. And that is also based at Southmead Hospital. And in my simplified way of thinking of it, I think of it as being a bit of an intensive care unit for stroke. So it's the place that you go to when you very first had a stroke, you're very sick, they're very high dependency beds, and you'll be very closely monitored within that. After a few days, when you're probably don't need such a high intensity of care, you'd be stepped down to the acute stroke unit, which in reality is the ward next door at Southmead Hospital. And you would be looked after there while you start to improve a little bit more. And you'd stay there for a week or something like that. And then after that, you would either, if you needed further hospital care, but you didn't need it in an acute setting, you'd go to a subacute rehab unit. Now, there will be 2 of these within Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire. So the first is at South Bristol Community Hospital and the second is at Western Hospital. And the location of those has been investigated intensively throughout the business case processes, and lots of studies have been done as to where's best for all patients to be able to get to and for visitors to be able to come and visit, so that it's equitable across the region. So they're the 2 sites that were identified. And you'd stay there for, up to a month sort of thing. Generally, I mean, these are all averages, but and that's where you'd receive some of the really intensive rehab while you're still needing a little bit of hospital care. I think probably the one of the benefits of that is that you're not, whilst you're improving, you're not sort of in a bed next to someone who's still incredibly sick, which I think is what can happen at the moment. And then once you've, if you're ready to leave the SARU, there's several options, which could be you may go home and just need some community support. So that's the ICSS, which is the Integrated Community Stroke Service. They will provide some care at home and some rehab at home and come into your house 3 times a day or 4 times a day, depending on what you need. Some people need that plus some social care input. Some people may need to go into a care home, which is the P3 on this sheet. I mean, some people may be able to go home straight from the hyperacute unit or the acute unit, but this is kind of the typical pathway of what we would expect under the reconfiguration. So do you want to go on to the next slide, Rebecca? Oh, yeah, and the one
That's
previous.
right.
No, it's the previous one, sorry. There, that one. So essentially, there's obviously got to be some benefits of this. And when we first started looking at how we can improve stroke care, we had sort of 7 programme aims, and it was things like, how do we improve on the prevention of stroke? How do we improve the quality of care people get and the quality of outcomes people get? There's that piece around equal access to stroke services and receiving the same stroke service throughout the region. We wanted to improve both the patient and the carer experience. Remember at the start, I said we had patients and carers who said they left hospital and felt like they'd been pushed over a cliff and had no support. We wanted to improve that. We hoped it'd have some improvement on workforce as well. If we can consolidate our workforce, we can have really highly specialised workforces that would hopefully attract more workers in from across the region and beyond, and also make sure that they are sharing skills, they're flexible, and hopefully increase staff satisfaction so that we won't get lots of people deciding stroke's not for them, they don't want to work there anymore. We wanted to obviously improve the digital technology available. So I think in terms of if you're a patient and you move from one hospital through into another, we can still see all of the care that you've received on your whole pathway, so that it makes those follow-ups much easier. It makes it much safer. And again, there is a value for money in there as well, in that it's more efficient to have one hyperacute stroke unit, because the way you can work your workforce and the way you use all your equipment will be more efficient if it's like that. So if you want to just move on and again. So this is just here to show you how complex this programme of work is. And it is incredibly complex. I think we have, at the heart of it, we have a stroke implementation programme board, and that's where a lot of the decisions get made around what we need to do next. If we'll put papers forward to that board and things can be approved at that board. Sometimes those things might need to go higher, so they'll go to the Healthier Together executive team, who may say, actually, yes, we're happy for you to do that. And underneath the Stroke Implementation Programme Board, we have lots and lots of work groups that look at things like clinical implementation and safety and finance and workforce, and the flow is how the pathway flows to make sure that we don't get a build-up of patients at one part on the pathway. And below that, we have there's lots and lots of other groups within each of the various services. So within acute services, that covers all the sort of HASU, and that covers things that happen in MBT and UHBW. And then we've got the sort of things that happen in the community hospitals and at home as well, and the voluntary services. So I just want to move on. And again, I don't want to go into loads of detail on this slide, but essentially this is within each hospital. So the main three providers involved in the collaboration are University Hospital, Bristol and Western, North Bristol Trust, and Sarona. Sarona are going to be responsible for running the subacute rehab units and the integrated community stroke service. And they will work closely with Life After Stroke as well. UHBW, which is the University Hospital, Bristol and Western, they currently have stroke patients, but they will no longer have stroke patients on the whole in their hospitals, but they will run all of the TIA clinics for the region. So they will coordinate that, and the majority of them will be run out of the BRI. And North Bristol Trust, of which Southmead Hospital is a part of, will run all of the acute services. So you can see that there's an awful lot of these are all the different working groups that are going on. So we have a working group just to look at how it's going to be when patients are brought into the emergency department, and how it's and how they're going to be treated. And then we have another working group that look at what happens to them when they go onto that hyperacute stroke unit. So this is just to demonstrate the complexity of all the different moving parts of this pathway. So do you want to move on to the next slide? So in the decision-making business case that was approved back in February last year, there was a timeline for the implementation to be set. And within that timeline, we said that the community stroke service would be implemented in August of last year. The subacute rehab units would go live in October last year, and the hyperacute stroke unit would go live in November last year. Now, obviously, we're now in January the following year, and not all of that has happened. And I guess that's one of the difficulties of moving from a very strategic document to a sorry, there's loads of noise behind me. It's one of the problems of moving from a strategic document into an implementation phase, that you suddenly come across lots and lots of issues that you hadn't anticipated, and they may affect go live. So if you move on to the next slide. So this slide shows our current timeline. So we went to our Healthier Together exec team and said, we don't think the timeline in the original case is possible, but we have mapped out a whole new timeline, and we're confident that this is what will happen. So what we've done is the integrated community stroke service has went live in October, and that is now delivering care visits multiple times a day to patients within their own homes, and that's working really well. And the impact of that is that it's starting to pull patients who are currently in the acute hospitals out of hospital, because we can now give them that care that they need. Because the reality is a lot of people who are in acute hospitals don't really need to be in an acute hospital, but we've just got nowhere else for them to go to receive the care, and this gives an alternative to that. The subacute rehab unit, which is based at South Bristol Community Hospital, has now got 20 stroke beds live. So they've got 20 beds within that hospital that are completely ring fenced for stroke patients. We also had mechanical thrombectomy, which is where they take a blood clot out of the patient to relieve that, and that was a service that was already in operation at Southmead Hospital, but it was only in operation between the hours of 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. That's now a full 24/7 service, and that went live in December, and they take patients from all over the region and wider, I think. And then at the end of March, South Bristol Community Hospital subacute unit will go fully live, which means they'll then have 30 stroke beds, and that's the capacity that they'll be operating at. So they will be working with 30 ring-fence stroke beds specifically for stroke patients to take them out of the acutes that bit earlier in their patient journey. And then on the 17th of May, the hyperacute stroke unit will go live. The Western subacute stroke unit will go live at the same time, because they're yes, I've just seen Hannah's question. Yes, it is. And they will go live on the 17th of May. The Western subacute stroke unit will go live on the 17th of May, simply because at the moment they've got inpatients there, so they'll just switch over using the same staff. And so the go live on the 17th of May will be the date at which the ambulance service knows to not send for every single patient who has a stroke within our area to bring them straight to Southmead Hospital. So that's a really important date for North Bristol Trust, because that's the date at which suddenly they're going to have a big influx of patients. So the reason for staggering the go live dates like this is so that we can ensure that other parts of the pathway are working fully to relieve that. Otherwise we just get a whole backlog of ambulances on day one at Southmead Hospital, which obviously isn't good for anyone. But what we're doing is we're doing lots and lots of data collection and flow monitoring from now to see, right, what impact is the integrated community stroke service having on acute beds, and then we'll be able to see what impact the subacute stroke unit that's open is having on stroke beds, so that we can make sure that on day one it will literally be the ambulances bringing them to Southmead Hospital, but there won't be an adverse impact. They'll just be able to flow through, because we'll be assured that the pathway is working. Some of the other things on here just show there's an awful lot of recruitment that needs to be done, which is all happening or has happened, and there's some tupi consultations where where we're having to move staff between sites. So we've already done some staff that have moved from both Southmead and UHBW down to the Sarona site to deal with some of the rehab needs, and there will be some staff changing from working at the BRI now in acute stroke care to working, because the acute stroke service will have effectively moved up to North Bristol, they'll move up to Southmead Hospital as well. So there's an awful lot of moving parts and a lot of complexity, but essentially May is our sort of drop dead go live date for everything. So can you move on? So as part of the programme, we have to say we have a critical path. And I mean, we have a whole huge list of things that need to be done in order, that we've agreed that will be done, because what we need to do is we need to deliver something that aligns with exactly what was said in that decision-making business case, because that's what all the hospital providers have signed up to. The critical path is but the critical path is looking at that whole big list of things and saying, well, what are the things that absolutely must be in place to enable us to go live? And we need to make, if they're not in place, it would halt go live. So what we do as the programme team, we've mapped all of that and we've detailed all those elements that go live. And then any risks that are around any of the elements, we identify those and we try and put mitigations in place to say, okay, well, if that happens, what we're going to do or how we're going to reduce that risk. And then, like I said, we have a massive full plan underlying everything that needs to be done, which will be delivered. Some of it may be delivered slightly after go live, but we'll be in a place. The critical path shows what needs to be delivered in order to go live safely. Do you want to move on? So I'm not going to major on these, but things that we absolutely must deliver are things like we've determined critical minimum staffing levels at each point in the pathway. So for example, we've looked at nursing on the hyperacute stroke unit and said, right, how many nurses would we like? And that's our sort of absolute, that's what we'll be aiming to get to. But how many do we actually need to operate safely? And that's often a lower number. And so we need to make sure that we can reach those. And what the team do is they're constantly mapping people who are in the pipeline, leavers, starters, and that kind of thing. And and we get like a trajectory and our current trajectories show that we will have the minimum staffing levels, which is good. All those tutor consultations need to be done in order for us to go live, so for staff to move from one place to another. In terms of the subacute rehab unit, we need to make sure that we have a medical model in place to deliver safely the service that we're doing, and we need to make sure all the staff have got the right stroke skills and competencies in place to treat those patients to the level that we expect. And then there's various other critical elements. So there's clinical ones in terms of we need to, whilst all the acute care will take place at Southmead Hospital, we've got to be prepared for a situation where we have a walk-in. So someone who has a stroke at home, say, and their partner thinks, actually, I'm not waiting for an ambulance, I'm going to take them straight to my nearest hospital. And so they may come into either Western or the BRI. If they need thrombolysis, which is where they give them drugs to sort of break the clot down, that has to be done really quickly in a specified time frame. And what we don't want to do is say, well, we don't offer the service at BRI anymore, so we're going to waste another hour trying to find someone to take you up to. So what we'll actually do is offer those services at both the BRI and Western, but they'll be, in order so that they get the same level of care, they will be supported remotely by a stroke consultant, and then once they've had that treatment has been started, they can be transferred, but we wouldn't want to delay any treatment, so that's something that must be in place. Do you want to move on to the next slide? And then
we've gone too far.
And then other things are things around making sure we've got the right process, making sure we've got process in place so that the system flows, so that we don't get that backup of ambulances at the beginning, making sure we've got the right leadership models in place to take the system forward. What we don't want is to implement and then everyone's been working incredibly collaboratively, and we want to keep that collaborative working and making sure that if there's an incident in one area of the pathway, the whole pathway learns from it, and we can do trend analysis and that sort of thing. So it's making sure we've got all the governance in place to deal with that. And then we need to make sure that all the digital elements that we need are in place. If you want to move on. So this really says that when the decision-making business case was done, we had to make some assumptions that may not be completely accurate when it comes to implementation. And some of those around how much the activity is going to grow, how much capacity there is. We also said we want it to be a single workforce across all aspects of a patient's pathway, so that you'll get a consultant and you'd hopefully see that consultant throughout the journey, even when you move out of the acute space into the subacute space. We also said, obviously, there has to be a minimum staffing level in place and digital solutions, and there is a requirement to work with social care partners to ensure flow out the system. It's obviously something that's massively in the news at the moment, and we know that it's really difficult to get people out of hospital with the social care available. But we've been whilst we know we're not going to solve that issue through the stroke programme, we've been really proactive, and at the South Bristol Community Hospital subacute rehab unit now, they have weekly meetings with all with social care workers every week, so that they can say, these are the patients we've got, these are the patients that are in the pipeline further up, this is when they're likely to need care, this is the sort of care they need, so that the social workers can always be thinking ahead, so that we can try and identify people and identify the needs that they might have, so that we can kind of get that flow through and not just get them stuck. So we are trying, despite the backdrop we're operating against. And John, go to the next slide. So, and next slide. So we're a few months off full implementation, and luckily we have had some achievements so far. And some of these are that the integrated community stroke service at home has been fully rolled out throughout Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire. And they are taking patients out of hospitals, which is brilliant. We've had successful movement of staff to those community posts. So people who work within rehab have moved from both the BRI, Western and Southmead hospitals and gone to work within the community, and that's working really well. We've at the stroke subacute rehab units, we had some management posts that would oversee the running of both units. They've been recruited to successfully, which is great, and so they're starting to have an impact. And we've obviously got the 20 confirmed beds at South Bristol Community Hospital in operation. That's an increase in beds, and it also gives quality improvement, because some of the stroke beds were based elsewhere, and so we've actually brought them together, which brings quality improvements as well already. So if you want to go to the next slide. And we've developed a series of flow metrics, which are basically data and figures that tell us whether flow is working throughout the pathway, whether patients, if they're staying in one area for too long or too little, and that's been a huge piece of work. But we now have data that we look at every week to say, actually, we can see that people are flowing through the pathway well, and that will be really critical when it comes to can we go live in a month's time, do you know, because if that isn't if that's showing that people just cannot get out of the hyperacute stroke unit, then it would be really difficult, but that's all looking very positive. We've developed lots and lots of standard operating procedures and processes that people know about. Our medical and nursing recruitment is on track, and we're looking at we've looked at where we think we'll be at go live. We think we'll be have enough people. We've got additional therapy staff that we've been able to recruit, and the 24/7 thrombectomy is live and working well. So I think we've actually achieved quite a lot so far. I'm trying to move on. Obviously, there are challenges. It's been a very, very challenging program. It's very complex, and it's probably one of the first programs that has tried to build one pathway across sort of a disease pathway that involves all different providers, and that's been really, really challenging. And some of it is silly things like our digital systems don't link up, and you know, working across providers is really challenging because each provider has their own priorities for things as well. So sometimes you think that's definitely the best way forward, and then someone else will come in and say we're not doing that, and so that's really tricky, and that's been really hard to negotiate. Obviously making sure that flow of patients is really challenging, and recruitment is really, really difficult. It's really hard to get hold of, to recruit people and to make sure that we've got the right people in the right place. So all of that stuff has been quite challenging, which is part of the reason why we move the timescales to give us a bit more time to get those things in place. Next slide. So next steps, we've got a series of go lives, and then once the after the 17th of May, we'll begin a period of transition into sort of business as usual, where there'll still be a lot of improvements being made, but essentially the pathway will be live, and it will start with you being brought into the hyperacute stroke unit at Southmead. So that's really where we are. So it's just, if there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Catherine. That's